if you were to choose only a simple workflow for creating
Yeah.
content for B2B, uh, perspective, how would you
Yeah.
choose what to create from the top of the funnel to the bottom of the funnel?
Great question. So I think it starts and ends with the research. So every company is going to be different, but the research needs to guide who your audience is. Let's say I want to, let's say I'm in waste management. Let's go into a niche that's like very abstract. If I am in waste management, I need to first research my audience and know who I'm trying to sell to. It might be waste management professionals. Cool. So what can I do that's going to capture their attention? Now, the traditional methods would be to start with the foundation of a website that is optimized for search. And I think that's fair. I think you need to have your host in order before you do any business, right? The host needs to be in order. What does that mean? It means you have to have your homepage set up to tell your value prop. You need to have a few landing pages that speak to the job to be done, your benefits, your features, your solutions. If you can, I always love when a brand has alternative and comparison pages on their site as well, because that can attract those bottom of funnel queries. But you start with your host. Then you say, all right, how much time do I have? I don't really have a lot of time. I agree. But if you understand your customers, maybe you can now start to think, how can you get in front of your ideal customer the most efficiently? The best way to do it, in my opinion, is to actually schedule podcast interviews with a bunch of people in waste management in your niche and in your industry and interview them. And then from those interviews, you now have a pillar asset. That pillar asset that you have just developed after a 50-minute conversation, diving deep into the trends of waste management and things that they're seeing, et cetera, two things are being accomplished. One of them, they don't even realize. But one thing that is being accomplished is this waste management professional now knows your software. They now know your solution. They now have goodwill between you and them because they shared with you all of their expertise. And people like people who listen to them. So if that you just sat there and listened for an hour and gave them credibility and shared that on social, they're going to have goodwill towards you. So you start with that pillar asset with the people that you want to actually sell to. Then you repurpose that conversation into blog posts, into long form content assets, into tweets, into LinkedIn posts, etc. And you can use AI to distribute that. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but what about at the bottom of funnel? Well, that podcast should be sponsored by your brand. So it's sponsored by your brand. So the people who listen to it, who are only going to be waste management people, because no one else is going to listen to that podcast. Like, you're not going to get, my mom's never listening to a waste management podcast. I'm never listening to a waste management podcast. It's not my world, right? But you know who will? Somebody who's trying to grow in the waste management industry. So if you're interviewing people who are at the top, the people who are at the bottom trying to work up, or peers are going to listen to that content, or they're going to read blog posts about it and things like that. So long story to a short question, you start with pillar content. And then around that pillar content, you create a bunch of micro assets and let those micro assets be distributed and promoted to get more people to this individual pillar piece that was created, and use that pillar piece to talk about things that you offer. Now, here's another great tip for this. If you are creating this podcast, you should be saying something on the podcast. Like, folks, if you haven't noticed, we recently just launched a new tool that helps waste management professionals do X, Y, and Z. Or, hey, everybody listening to this podcast, we just launched a checklist that will help waste management professionals increase their salary in 14 days. Cool. Who's not listening to that? Who's not going to download that checklist or that cheat sheet? You see people download it. Now you run remarketing ads against those people. You have sales reaching out to them, asking to pick their brains, to have a conversation, all of those things. So that's the method. I know as I continued to talk, more founders, more leaders were probably, that's a lot of work, Ross. Yes, but it can be scaled much more efficiently now than it could have 5 years ago. AI makes so much of this way easier. For email, there's tools like Singulate that make things easier. For repurposing video content, nowhere else to look but Flowjin. Like, you can do that. I'm a big fan of Claude and Perplexity for turning content into longer form content. I do think human touch is important, though. Like, you do need to have that subject matter expert optimize, review, and be the editor on those final pieces. And then there's great tools like Riverside for podcast recording that you can use and stuff like that, and all those different things. So that's the play. I hope that was valuable, even though it was a bit of a ramble. But yeah, that's the play.